The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla stepped out of the royal car. Her emerald green dress rustled softly in the breeze, and her practiced smile was firmly in place. Behind her, Princess Charlotte, just 8 years old, clutched her small handbag nervously. The young princess had been invited to accompany her step-grandmother to a charity event, her first solo appearance without her parents, William and Catherine. The royal guards stood at perfect attention, their red uniforms brilliant against the grey stone walls. These men had served the crown for years, their discipline legendary, their loyalty unquestionable. Among them stood Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, a 20-year veteran whose weathered face had witnessed countless royal ceremonies. Camilla walked with purpose, her heels clicking rhythmically on the ancient stones. She had grown comfortable in her role as queen consort, though the shadow of Diana still lingered in public memory. Today was meant to be straightforward, a simple walkabout before entering the charity venue. Charlotte followed 2 steps behind, her small figure dwarfed by the grandeur around her. As they approached the main entrance, a small crowd of well-wishers had gathered behind the barriers. Children waved Union Jack flags, and elderly women clutched bouquets of flowers. Camilla paused, considering whether to greet them. Protocol dictated a brief acknowledgement before proceeding inside, but she noticed Charlotte had stopped, captivated by a little girl in a wheelchair who was holding a handmade sign that read, "Princess Charlotte, you're my hero." Without hesitation, Charlotte started walking toward the barrier. Her innocent compassion overrode any protocol training she had received. Camilla's expression shifted. This wasn't part of the plan. The schedule was tight, and any deviation could throw off the entire day's events. "Charlotte," Camilla called sharply, her voice carrying an edge that made nearby guards shift slightly. The young princess paused but didn't turn back immediately. She was already halfway to the barrier, drawn by the genuine joy on the disabled child's face. What happened next would be dissected by royal watchers for years to come. Camilla, perhaps forgetting the presence of the guards and the watching crowd, strode forward with determination. Her hand reached out, not gently but with clear intent to grasp Charlotte's arm and redirect her back to the planned route. The guards watched this unfold with growing unease. Their training covered many scenarios, but this presented a unique dilemma. Their duty was to protect members of the royal family, all members. Sergeant Mitchell's jaw tightened imperceptibly as he observed Camilla's approach toward the young princess. Just as Camilla's hand was about to make contact with Charlotte's shoulder, her voice rang out with unmistakable authority. "Come here immediately. We don't have time for this nonsense." The words, spoken in what she likely thought was a private moment, carried across the quiet courtyard. Charlotte flinched at the harsh tone, her small shoulders dropping. The joyful expression on her face crumbled, replaced by confusion and hurt. She had only wanted to say hello to a child who looked up to her. In her young mind, kindness should never be considered nonsense. Sergeant Mitchell made a decision that would define the next 37 seconds. He stepped forward from his position, breaking the cardinal rule of guard protocol. His movement was subtle but deliberate, positioning himself between Camilla and Charlotte. His fellow guards watched in stunned silence as Mitchell's action created a human barrier. Camilla stopped abruptly, her face flushing with indignation. No guard had ever interfered with her movements before. Her eyes blazed with a mixture of shock and anger as she looked up at Mitchell's impassive face. "Stand aside," she commanded, her voice low but trembling with barely controlled fury. Mitchell remained motionless, his training in crowd control and protection overriding the usual deference shown to senior royals. In his peripheral vision, he could see Charlotte had reached the barrier and was kneeling down to speak with the little girl in the wheelchair. The child's mother was crying tears of joy as Charlotte held her daughter's hand. "I said stand aside," Camilla repeated, her voice rising. The crowd had gone completely silent, sensing the unprecedented tension. Phones appeared in hands, though most were too shocked to start recording immediately. "That is a direct order from your queen." The word queen hung in the air like a challenge. Mitchell's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his stance. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, carrying the weight of his 2 decades of service. "With respect, ma'am, my duty is to protect members of the royal family from any perceived threat. The implication was clear, though diplomatically stated. Camilla's face went from flushed to pale in seconds. She understood what Mitchell hadn't said aloud, that in this moment, she was being viewed as a potential threat to Charlotte's well-being. Behind Mitchell, Charlotte was now posing for a photo with the disabled child, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding behind her. Other guards had subtly moved to create a wider protective circle, their loyalty to Mitchell evident in their positioning. Camilla's hands trembled as she clutched her handbag. The 37 seconds felt like an eternity. She could feel the weight of every eye upon her, could sense the shift in the atmosphere. This was supposed to be her domain, her authority unquestioned. Yet here stood a guard, respectfully but firmly challenging her treatment of Diana's granddaughter. The seconds ticked by. 25. 26. 27. Camilla's mind raced through her options. She could insist, create a scene, demand Mitchell's dismissal. But the damage was already done. The guards had chosen their side, Camilla's mask had slipped in public. The carefully constructed image of the benevolent queen consort was cracking. At the 30-second mark, a child's laughter rang out. Charlotte was hugging the little girl in the wheelchair, promising to send her a special letter from the palace. The pure joy in that moment stood in stark contrast to the adult drama playing out nearby. Sergeant Mitchell never wavered. His fellow guards stood ready, a unified front that spoke volumes about their priorities. They served the crown, yes, but they also served justice and protection of the innocent. In their eyes, Charlotte represented both. As the 37th second passed, Camilla made her choice. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked toward the building entrance alone. Her retreat was dignified but unmistakably a defeat. The click of her heels sounded hollow now, lacking their earlier authority. Mitchell maintained his position until Camilla had entered the building. Only then did he step back to his original post, his expression never changing. The other guards followed suit, returning to their positions as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Charlotte, finished with her impromptu meet and greet, turned back toward the entrance. She looked around, confused by Camilla's absence. Mitchell caught the eye of a female guard, who stepped forward with a warm smile to guide Charlotte inside. Her Majesty went ahead to prepare for the ceremony, Princess, she said gently. Charlotte nodded, still glowing from her interaction with the young fan. Inside the venue, Camilla stood before a mirror in the powder room, struggling to compose herself. Her hands still shook as she reapplied her lipstick. The reflection staring back at her was that of a woman who had just experienced a profound humiliation, not from words or actions, but from the simple act of a guard doing his duty. The ceremony proceeded as planned, though those present noticed an unusual tension. Camilla's speeches lacked their usual warmth, and she seemed to avoid any interaction with Charlotte beyond the absolutely necessary. The young princess, innocent to the earlier confrontation, continued to charm everyone with her natural grace and kindness. The drive back to the palace was silent. Charlotte dozed in the corner of the car, tired from the day's events. Camilla stared out the window, her mind replaying those 37 seconds over and over. She knew by evening, the staff would be whispering. By tomorrow, the press would have the story. The guards talk among themselves, and loyalty to the crown didn't always mean loyalty to every individual who wore it. At the palace, King Charles waited in his study, already aware that something had transpired. The speed at which news traveled within royal circles was remarkable. His aide had discreetly informed him of an incident involving Camilla and the guards. Camilla entered the study with forced composure. Charles looked up from his papers, his expression carefully neutral. "How was the charity event?" he asked, though they both knew this wasn't really his question. "There was a situation," Camilla began, choosing her words carefully. "Charlotte broke protocol, and, when I attempted to correct her, the guards interfered." Charles set down his pen slowly. "Interfered?" Sergeant Mitchell stepped between Charlotte and me. He refused a direct order. Camilla's voice carried a mix of indignation and something else, perhaps uncertainty. "What exactly were you attempting to do that required guard intervention?" Charles's tone remained measured, but there was an undertone that made Camilla shift uncomfortably. I was simply going to guide Charlotte back to our scheduled path. She was deviating to speak with some child in the crowd. Even as she said it, Camilla heard how it sounded. Charles was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful but pointed. The guards are trained to protect the royal family. All members of the royal family. Their intervention suggests they perceived a threat. I am not a threat to Charlotte, Camilla said, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. Perhaps not intentionally, Charles replied. But, Camilla, you must understand. Charlotte is 8 years old. She is Diana's granddaughter. The public watches how she is treated with extreme scrutiny. If veteran guards felt compelled to act, perhaps you should reflect on what they observed. Camilla felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from anger or shame, she couldn't tell. So I'm to be undermined by staff now? You were not undermined. You were prevented from making what could have been a catastrophic mistake. Imagine if someone had filmed you grabbing Charlotte's arm, pulling her away from a disabled child. Imagine those headlines. The truth of his words hit home. Camilla sank into a chair, suddenly, feeling every one of her years. She had let frustration and a need for control override her judgment. And the guards had protected not just Charlotte, but, potentially Camilla herself from a publicity disaster. What happens to Mitchell? She asked quietly. Charles studied his wife. Nothing happens to Mitchell. He did exactly what he should have done. In fact, I intend to commend him privately for his discretion and judgment. He paused. The question, Camilla, is what happens next with you and Charlotte? Meanwhile, in the guard's ready room, Sergeant Mitchell was writing his report. His colleagues had been supportive but concerned. Challenging a senior royal, even indirectly, could have career-ending consequences. But Mitchell felt no regret. His duty was clear, his conscience cleaner. A knock on the door interrupted his writing. Another guard entered, his expression unreadable. Mitchell, you're wanted in the castle. King's orders. Mitchell rose, straightening his uniform. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same calm determination that had carried him through those 37 seconds. He had served the crown for 20 years, but, more importantly, he had served what the crown was meant to represent: protection, dignity, and care for all its members, especially the most vulnerable. The walk to the king's office seemed longer than usual. Mitchell's footsteps echoed in the ancient corridors, past portraits of monarchs who had faced their own moments of crisis. He thought of Charlotte's innocent face, of how she had flinched at Camilla's sharp words. No child should fear kindness being called nonsense. King Charles was alone when Mitchell entered. The king gestured to a chair, an unusual informality that made Mitchell even more alert. Sergeant Mitchell, Charles began, I've heard about this morning's events. Your Majesty, Mitchell replied simply, ready for whatever came next. I want to be very clear, Charles continued. Your actions today represented the finest traditions of the Royal Guard. You protected a child from potential distress while maintaining respect for all parties involved. Your discretion prevented what could have been a deeply damaging situation. Mitchell remained silent, though inwardly he felt a wave of relief. The king understood. There will be no official record of the incident, Charles said. But, I want you to know that I am personally grateful for your service. Charlotte is precious to this family, to the nation. She represents our future. Anyone who understands that deserves recognition, not punishment. The conversation was brief but meaningful. As Mitchell left the king's office, he felt vindicated. The 37 seconds that had seemed like an eternity had affirmed something crucial: that duty to the crown meant protecting its most innocent members, even from other royals. In her private apartments, Camilla sat alone, replaying the morning's events. Her lady-in-waiting had cancelled her evening appointments, sensing her distress. The confrontation with Mitchell had stripped away layers of carefully constructed royal persona, revealing uncomfortable truths beneath. She thought of Charlotte, of the joy on the child's face when greeting that little girl in the wheelchair. It was the same natural compassion Diana had possessed, the ability to connect with people that couldn't be taught or faked. Camilla had spent years trying to step out of Diana's shadow, but, in 37 seconds, she had shown why that shadow remained. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, expecting her lady-in-waiting. Instead, Charlotte stood in the doorway, still in her dress from the morning's event but now paired with fuzzy slippers. "Aunt Camilla?" Charlotte's voice was uncertain. "Daddy said you might be feeling sad. I brought you something." The young princess held out a drawing, clearly done in the car on the way back. It showed two figures holding hands, a taller one labeled Aunt Camilla and a smaller one labeled me. Above them was written in Charlotte's careful handwriting, "Thank you for taking me today." Camilla felt her throat constrict. This child, who she had spoken to so harshly, who had every right to avoid her, had come to comfort her. It was a grace Camilla knew she didn't deserve but desperately needed. "Charlotte, Camilla began, then stopped. How did one apologize to an 8-year-old for behavior even grown adults would find unacceptable? "I'm sorry I was sharp with you today. You were being kind to that little girl, and kindness is never nonsense." Charlotte climbed onto the sofa beside Camilla, with the unconscious trust of childhood. "It's okay. Mummy says everyone has grumpy days. Even queens." The simple absolution broke something in Camilla. Tears came then, silent but cleansing. Charlotte, alarmed, hugged her step-grandmother. "Don't cry, Aunt Camilla. Tomorrow will be better." As Charlotte comforted her, Camilla understood what Mitchell and the guards had seen, not just a breach of protocol or a moment of harsh discipline, but a fundamental failure to recognize what truly mattered. The guards had protected Charlotte, yes, but they had also protected the very essence of what the monarchy should represent. The story of those 37 seconds spread through royal circles like wildfire, though it never reached the public press. Staff members who had served for decades spoke in hushed tones about Mitchell's brave stance. The guards developed an even fiercer protectiveness toward Charlotte, knowing that their willingness to act had been validated at the highest level. For Camilla, those 37 seconds became a turning point. She began to observe Charlotte more carefully, learning from the young princess's natural way with people. The harsh edges that had emerged that day slowly softened, replaced by a genuine effort to understand why Diana's approach had resonated so deeply with the public. Sergeant Mitchell continued his service, never speaking publicly about the incident. But, among the guards, he became something of a legend, the man who had stood between a queen and a princess, choosing duty over deference. His example inspired others to remember that their ultimate loyalty was to the ideals of protection and service, not to individual personalities or titles. Months later, at another charity event, observers noted a marked change in the dynamic between Camilla and Charlotte. The queen consort was more patient, more willing to let Charlotte's natural compassion guide their public appearances. When Charlotte stopped to spend extra time with a young cancer patient, Camilla waited with a genuine smile, even joining the conversation. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Old habits died hard, and there were still moments of tension. But the ghost of those 37 seconds lingered, a constant reminder of what could be lost in a moment of unchecked authority. In the guards' ready room, a new motto appeared, unofficial but universally understood: 37 seconds of courage can define 20 years of service. It became a reminder that their duty might sometimes require them to stand against the very people they served, in order to serve them better. The incident also had ripple effects throughout the palace staff. Stories emerged of other moments when staff had wished they could intervene but hadn't dared. Mitchell's example gave them courage. A new understanding developed: loyalty to the crown meant protecting its values, not just its members. William and Catherine, who had anxiously awaited news of Charlotte's first solo engagement, heard about the incident through palace channels. Their gratitude to Mitchell was profound but necessarily private. They ensured Charlotte continued to have opportunities for public appearances, trusting now more than ever in the guards' judgment. For Charlotte herself, the day remained a positive memory. She didn't know about the confrontation, only that she had made a sick little girl smile and that Aunt Camilla had seemed sad later. Her drawing remained in Camilla's private study, a daily reminder of grace unearned but freely given. As years passed, the story of those 37 seconds became part of palace lore, told to new guards as an example of moral courage. It represented a moment when the institution's true purpose, protecting the innocent and vulnerable, had triumphed over rigid hierarchy. The royal guards continued their silent vigil, standing at attention through ceremonies and celebrations. But, beneath their stoic exteriors beat hearts that understood their true duty. They were not mere decorative figures or symbols of tradition. They were protectors, and sometimes protection meant standing between members of the same family. Camilla, to her credit, never sought revenge against Mitchell or tried to have him reassigned. The humiliation of that day had taught her something valuable about power and its proper use. She had entered that courtyard as a queen consort secure in her authority. She had left it understanding that true authority came from moral leadership, not from titles or positions. The relationship between Camilla and Charlotte evolved over time, shaped by that crucial intervention. What could have become a pattern of harsh discipline and resentment instead became an opportunity for growth. Charlotte learned that even queens could apologize and change. Camilla learned that strength could be found in gentleness. In the official histories, those 37 seconds would never appear. There would be no record of a guard stepping between a queen consort and a young princess, no mention of harsh words spoken or authority challenged. But, in the lived experience of those who served, who protected, who witnessed, those seconds represented something profound. They showed that the monarchy's strength lay not in unquestioned obedience but in principled service. They proved that a single person, standing firm in their convictions, could redirect the course of events. They demonstrated that protecting the vulnerable was more important than preserving hierarchy. Sergeant Thomas Mitchell retired with full honors years later, his service record exemplary. At his retirement ceremony, he received an unexpected visitor. Princess Charlotte, now a young woman, came to thank him personally. Though she had only learned of the incident years later, she understood its significance. "You protected me when I couldn't protect myself," she said simply. "You showed me what true service means." Mitchell, ever the professional, simply nodded. But those who knew him saw the emotion in his eyes. 37 seconds of moral courage had defined not just his career but the very nature of royal protection. The morning sun still casts shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle. Guards still stand at attention in their red uniforms. But now they carry with them the knowledge that their duty extends beyond mere ceremony. They are guardians not just of buildings and bodies, but of principles and innocence. And, somewhere in the palace archives, though never officially recorded, lives the memory of 37 seconds that changed everything when a guard chose protection over protocol, when a princess learned that kindness matters, and when a queen discovered that true power lies not in commanding obedience but in earning respect. Those 37 seconds broke Camilla's assumption of absolute authority, but, in breaking it, they offered her something more valuable, the chance to rebuild herself into a worthy guardian of the monarchy's future. The royal guard's response to her order for Charlotte had been more than a refusal, it had been a gift, wrapped in a moment of profound courage and delivered with silent dignity. The story serves as a reminder that in any institution, no matter how ancient or hierarchical, individual conscience must sometimes assert itself. The guards who stood with Mitchell that day upheld a tradition older and more sacred than blind obedience, the tradition of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. As the years rolled on, the impact of those 37 seconds continued to ripple through the royal household. They had revealed fundamental truths about power, protection, and the purpose of service. They had shown that even in the most traditional of institutions, there was room for moral courage and principled stands. The morning when Camilla's authority was challenged by a guard's conscience had become a turning point, not just for those directly involved but for the institution itself. It reaffirmed that the monarchy's survival depended not on rigid adherence to hierarchy but on its ability to protect and nurture its youngest, most vulnerable members. And so the story ends where it began, with guards standing at attention, ready to serve and protect. But now their service carries deeper meaning, informed by the knowledge that sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is the courage to say no. In 37 seconds, Sergeant Mitchell had shown them all what true service to the crown meant, not blind obedience to those who wear it, but fierce protection of what it represents. The Royal Guard's response to Camilla's order for Charlotte had lasted only 37 seconds, but its impact would last for generations. It stood as proof that in moments of moral clarity, individuals can shape history not through grand gestures but through simple acts of principled courage. The break in Camilla's authority had ultimately strengthened the monarchy by reaffirming its most essential values: compassion, protection, and service to all.